Hello and welcome to Arsenal Analysed live instant reaction and analysis. Today is all about Arsenal versus Crystal Palace, a convincing 5-0 win and a much needed win off the back of some rather indifferent form, to put it politely. And today I'm joined by none other than regular Keith so that we can discuss, break down, analyse, you name it, the result that we've just picked up at home at the Emirates. So thank you very much for coming along, Keith. What did you? How are you feeling about the result?
No sweat, mate. Thank you very much for inviting me again. Obviously, I'm not that bad penny that keeps coming back. Really happy. Obviously, we'll go into it more as we go through the show. But yeah, I mean, I was hoping for a win. I didn't really hand on heart expect a 5-0, but yeah, more than happy. It's nice to be doing a show where we've got some nice stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it feels like a while since we've had nice things to say about Arsenal. On this channel, obviously, we're not sort of hypercritical or over the top with the way we analyse things. But nevertheless, when you lose 3 games on the bounce over the Christmas break, it's never easy. And it's not what you want to see, whether or not you're a positive gooner, a constructive criticism type. It's difficult to swallow, but to come back after what was 2 weeks without any Arsenal, this winter break, pivotal time of the season, some Arsenal fans losing their minds that the title challenge had gone. This was the perfect response, and scoring 5 as well was just the cherry on the top, I suppose.
Absolutely. Sorry, I lost my train there because one of the children has left some food in the car.
No, that's okay.
Sorry, can you skim over that again? What I missed?
Yeah, no, I was just saying that, like, obviously, whether or not you're, a positive gooner, whether you're someone that's hypercritical of Arsenal, whichever side of the fence that you sit on, having come back after that 2-week break to win the way we did and to get 5 goals, to get this sort of title challenge back on track was really kind of the cherry on the cake, just what we needed, from the fans' point of view, but also from the club's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned just now, like, this isn't the sort of channel. We're not the sort of people that like to be hypercritical. We know the ones that we're talking about, the ones that I'm not especially a huge fan of. They'll probably be very, very quiet this afternoon. I
imagine they will.
Yeah, I think the main thing, it's important to be reasonable and measured in what you're saying and how you're trying to think about the things that we want to see. Yeah, we were disappointed. The last 3 games, it was shocking, and I've got my own thoughts on where we went wrong and where we went right today. But to come in after a 2-week break with a 5-0, and you know me, I'm always banging on about the importance of goal difference. And if you look at goal difference at any point during the league, you will see those teams who are going to be there or thereabouts, and you'll see those teams down the other end, and you can judge an awful lot on goal difference. And also, being a child of 1989 and that night at Liverpool, since then it's been ingrained in me just how important goal difference is. And now we're back up into the top 20s. There's Liverpool, Man City and us, and we've got daylight with the goal difference. So in the 5 goals, I'm not a huge fan of game management unless it's like, I don't know, on a 2-legger and you're 4-0 up and you just don't want to let it slip. But I find the best way of game management when you're 3-0 up with half hour to go is keep going. Obviously, keep it tight at the back, but you've got to keep going, because we did that today, which was a really pleasant change. It's like sometimes we'll get ahead, then we'll sit back, and then the other team gets back into it. And we've all been there far too many times.
Way too many. Way too many. And just as we finish off our kind of instant thoughts on the game and jumping into some analysis and breaking down what happened over the course of the 90 minutes, get your comments in the chat box. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your opinions. Fire some questions at us and we can answer those before we get into the analysis. If not, we'll dive into that in just a few minutes. And touching on what you just said there, Keith, and I found it quite funny, actually, because as you mentioned, we scored 5 goals. Goal difference is really, really important. When competing against the likes of Man City and the amount of goals that they score. I don't know if you picked it up in commentary, but I think we were around sort of like 2, maybe 3-0. And one of the commentators mentioned that, this is the sort of game that Man City would win 4 or 5-0 and Arsenal just aren't quite at that level. And then irony has it that come the 96th minute, Arsenal are 5-0 up. So that was a nice one to look at come the final whistle, knowing the way that the commentators can be kind of biased at times, even though it is Manchester City that they're leaning on. So I don't think in terms of sort of instant reaction that there's really much more from myself. I don't know if you have anything else to say on that. I'm quite keen to jump into the tactical side, which will be actually very quick today because I didn't see it as this huge tactical battle. It's going to be a real straightforward one, probably 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll run through the sort of 90-minute breakdown. So anything to add, Keith, before we jump into that side of things?
No, I think we've capped everything off there, mate, to be honest.
Perfect. A few comments coming in just before we jump into the analysis. John mentioning to score 5 and we didn't even play at our best is incredible. Great to see confidence from Martinelli as well. And that is very true because Martinelli has been in some indifferent form this season compared to last year. And the result we needed to get back on the horse. Absolutely could not agree more with you there, Judge. So I'm just going to bring up some bits and pieces on screen for you. And for anyone who either watches this channel or has watched this channel on a regular basis, who maybe just generally into their analysis away from the channel and likes to kind of delve deep into kind of how Arsenal set up and their sort of tactical battles against their opponents and how their opponents may set up. We can see here on screen now, just very quickly, this was the average positioning of the Arsenal 11 in this fixture against Crystal Palace. And to be honest with you, as I said, if you're a regular analytical type, the shape that we can see on screen here isn't something out of the ordinary, very much how we've seen Arsenal set up over the last kind of 12 to 18 months, if I'm being honest with you. You know, we can see here in the middle of the park, you've got your Declan Rice as your single pivot, which last year would have been Thomas Partey, Kai Havertz and Odegaard either side of him as those 8s, if you will. The 3 at the back, Zinchenko tucking in, and then your front 3. Gabriel Jesus, actually, in my opinion, is a little bit more advanced than where we normally see him. We see him normally in midfield, don't we, as that sort of box midfield, overloading midfield, creating that 4 in there. And Saka and Martinelli are normally quite high and wide. I don't know if there was anything that you noticed in the Arsenal shape today that was different to what we would normally see, Keith?
I'm really interested in Jesus' position, actually. I think that's obviously something they've worked on in Dubai, because obviously all the talk has been about getting a new striker, which I don't think was ever going to happen. But it's obviously been drilled to be playing further forward. And the shape, just the main thing I noticed there, it just looks narrower than we're kind of used to, especially with the wide players. And it was good to see Benny overlapping a bit more today. I haven't seen a lot of that the last probably 5 or 6 games, but it was good to see that happening again. The one thing I'm interested to see, and I know the game was different when ESR came on because it was stretched, Palace were tired and what have you.
Yes.
But I'd be interested to see the difference between his average position and Kai Havertz, because it felt like ESR was he felt like he was further forward, but it just seemed like there was more movement and he was a bit more involved. Like I say, that could be because the game had evolved by the time he came on.
Yeah, that is true. It's something worth looking into because of where the game was when he came on, as you say. And interestingly here, what we can see with Kai Havertz is that he seems to have taken up quite a lot of a position in this left back role, which is something that we used to see quite often from Granit Xhaka, who was maybe more defensively minded in comparison to Kai Havertz. So I did find that quite interesting, very much on this left-hand side, which you'd imagine and expect playing as that left 8. But if we click on Smith Rowe here, obviously Arsenal in a much more handsome position at this point. So there isn't as much of a need to maybe, sit in this sort of pocket. And we can see him here in a much more advanced role, which is when he has played in that left wing role more narrowly in comparison to Martinelli. I suppose those are the sorts of positions there between the lines that you'd imagine he should be picking up as a left 8.
Those two switching quite a bit actually as the game went on, ESR and Martinelli. I thought it was quite good to see them switching around quite a lot.
It's good because Arsenal love to play this kind of fluid system, and we know from the signings that Arteta has made that he loves players who can play multiple positions. And Arteta really is making formations and positions something to be questioned, if you will. So it's constantly asking that question of that Palace back line. Am I following Martinelli and am I following ESR? You know, constantly be pulled out of position. So it really, really makes things interesting. The one thing that this picture doesn't show is obviously how Arsenal set up defensively. And to be honest with you, I didn't see anything any different to how we normally set up. It's that rigid 4-4-2, looking to win the ball back. Odegaard and Jesus at the front of that 4-4-2 with Martinelli and Saka on either side looking to pounce on the counter-attack when we did win the ball back. So I didn't see any difference there. And then if we have a look quickly at Crystal Palace before we jump into that 90-minute breakdown, back five from Crystal Palace, set up away from home to frustrate Arsenal. And they did frustrate Arsenal in sort of parts of the first half, which we'll go into in more detail. But having a look at the average shape here of Crystal Palace, 5 at the back, looking at the front three, clearly looking to hit Arsenal in the counter-attack as and when they feel they can take risks. Would you say that's a fair way of looking at things, Keith, or did you see things differently?
No, that's exactly how I saw it. I mean, even when you saw the lineup, it was just going to be a bank of 5, bank of 4, and the big lad Mateta up front. By the way, he's an absolute unit, that bloke.
He really is. He really, really is. Saliba and Gabriel were pretty good at marking most players in the Premier League and physical battles, really, really good at that. But as you said yourself, that he was an absolute handful for both of them today.
Yeah, I thought William probably dealt slightly better with him than Gabriel did. It's the thing with Saliba, because he's such a skillful player, it's easy to forget just how much of a physical presence he is, especially when he lines up next to Gabriel as well. But I thought William did especially well in the duels with him. But no, they were purely set up to soak everything up and hit us on the break.
Exactly that. Yeah, there was. It didn't really look to change too much as well, even going into the break at 2-0. When they came out in the second half, there weren't really any tactical changes that I noticed in terms of the way that they were trying to maybe punish Arsenal or lure them into traps to maybe catch them out and get that goal. Because at 2-1, it's a different game. Arsenal weren't really troubled too much. And we'll take a look at some of the stats in a minute, which make some really, 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 really good reading. Just before we do that, let's go through some comments from you guys. Keith, with a big fan in the chat from Judge. Stop being so handsome, please. Chippy Boy saying that it was a good result today, but a little worried about depth. And I do have to agree, depth is going to be something that most Arsenal fans will be worried about this season. You only have to look back at last year where we lost key players at the business end of the season and didn't have the necessary replacements. And we have to hope that the same thing doesn't happen again this season. Welcome to Rancid Pumpkin as well. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon to go through the game. Another comment coming in here from Chippy Boy. Thought Kai was very good, quiet today, sorry. ESR looked lively when coming on. Yeah, have to agree. Kai Havertz went down a little bit too easy for me in the first half under a number of challenges. ESR clearly with a point to prove between now and the end of the season to be part of this Arsenal squad moving forwards. So, let's have a look at some stats very, very quickly. We can see here Arsenal with a very, very dominant performance, 61% possession compared to Palace's 39. Expected goals of just over 3. Obviously, we got 5. And I think the other one to look at here is we had 21 shots, 6 on target, 5 of which being converted, which is just absolutely outrageous in terms of percentages. You don't really see that too often. Maybe there's a question there to be had that we should be maybe having more shots on target. I don't know. But what makes a really good reading for me, and this is where you have to add context to stats. Stats on their own are great and they can tell one story. But when you really kind of get behind what they mean, it can tell a completely different story. Now, what I mean by that, if we have a look at Crystal Palace, 12 shots, 5 on target isn't bad. But if we have a look at this picture here on the left-hand side, look at how many of the shots from Crystal Palace came inside the box in comparison to the number of shots that Arsenal had inside the box. And what makes for even better reading is I was watching this live. I had my screens side by side when I was watching the game. When you look at the first half, Arsenal only had one shot outside the box, and Crystal Palace had just the one shot inside the box. It just goes to show how much Arsenal were creating inside that 18-yard box. And it makes such a difference when it comes to things like XG and putting that goalkeeper under pressure. So I thought that made for some really good reading. I'm sure there will be other stats and numbers that other people might have noticed, especially those regular watchers on the channel. By all means, get those interesting facts and stats in the comment section and we'll go through them. Was there anything that you noticed, Keith, in these areas at all?
The thing is with XG, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because we tend to have most of our shots inside the box. You know, we still do shoot from outside the box. And I noticed that was a bit more prevalent in the Liverpool game. But I suppose from the point of XG, a big chance would be classed as one inside the box as opposed to outside the box. So I suppose it can sometimes give a slightly false reading. But the fact that what we got there, about a third of our shots were on target, whereas just under half of Palace's were on target. That's still something that we need to work on. Which I mean, we've got another 10-day break now, haven't we?
Yes.
It was just nice to see the ball going in open play. Obviously, from set pieces, what we got now, 13.
We do indeed. Leading, ranked number 1.
Keith, we will win every single game for the rest of the season. Every single goal will come from a header from a corner. I would take that. But obviously, I don't know about you. I cheer a little bit more when it's a goal from open play, like just the beautiful, purest side of football. So that kind of gets me a little bit more excited. But having said that, 2 goals, and I don't care what anyone says, 2 goals for Gabriel because he's in my FPL. And the second one as an Oggy off Henderson is an absolute disgrace, in my opinion. But no, those are the main things. Just set piece is brilliant, and I'm still very confused about XG. I'm very old, and I'm new to all this this statistical analysis type stuff. But it would be nice to see the shots on target a little bit higher than 6 out of 21.
Yeah, maybe today with the shots on target, because I do completely agree with you. I think they do need to be, you know, higher. If we're having 21 shots
saved by the goalkeeper or hit the crossbar or go in.
So saved by the goalkeeper or go in is a shot on target. And
there's so many that get blocked, and that's just the way we play and the way teams set up against us. So that again, it might be slightly uneven statistics.
Skewed.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's one of those, isn't it? Sometimes it depends on who you're getting the information from as well. And it's quite funny when you say about XG, because there are various different websites that I collect data from when it comes to XG. And what I find quite funny is that every website has it slightly different. So whilst we can see here that it's just over 3, you know, you go onto another website or you'll go to another analyst and it'll be slightly higher or slightly lower. So it's interesting to know how they work it out, and it's all about, you know, distance from goal and how difficult the opportunity is and that kind of thing. I understand it from that point of view. So it, in some ways, depending on who the analyst is, there is a little bit of it, maybe a bit of opinion creeping in. I don't know, or maybe the data model that they use when they're inputting the data, I don't know. But we're getting really, really deep here in terms of analytics. But in terms of the first part of the game, if we just look at the, let me come out of this screen a second and scroll up to momentum. Here we go. A sea of red when it comes to momentum, which is great viewing. But in terms of the first 10 minutes, just before the goal, we'll talk about the first goal in just a moment. So in that first 10 minutes, for me personally, there weren't really too much to analyse. Arsenal very much in control. You know, Crystal Palace not causing them any issues. Was there anything in that first 10 minutes before the goal that you noticed, that you picked up, that might be worth sharing? Or are you quite happy to just kind of jump in and discuss that first goal?
I'll tell you the one thing I did notice really, really quickly, first 10 minutes or so, it felt like we were moving the ball a lot quicker. And the thing that really struck me was Saliba and Gabriel in previous games recently, they've been having 3 and 4 touches, whereas this time it was 1 touch, kill it and move it along. And it felt like, because we're playing out from the back so much, that they actually control the pace of the game every bit as much as, say, Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard. So I was very, very impressed with how much quicker those two were moving the ball as well.
That's a good observation, actually, because those little subtle differences in games can be the difference between a certain player getting slipped in behind a defender or to break the lines. And at this level, when you're competing against the Liverpool, when you're competing against the Man City, those little differences can be absolutely huge in securing 3 points. And, thankfully today, we scored 5 goals. But as you mentioned earlier, there are other games where you go 1-0 up, you go 2-0 up, you make a silly mistake. And when those subtle changes aren't implemented, you get bitten in the backside. Fortunately, it wasn't the case today. Just before we go into the first goal, I can see there's a few people in the chat that share our opinion with regards to XG. A lot of people don't seem to be a fan of it. And to be quite honest with you, I'm not surprised. It seemed to be this big thing when it first came out. Everyone jumped on board and it's slowly fizzled out since. And I am not surprised at all.
Really interested in what you said, actually. Just going to XG really, really quickly if I can. That you were saying there's different people that analyse different things. In my tiny little brain, it was just like there's one geezer sat in a darkened room and he provides all the XG stats and everybody uses them. So I'm pleased you've cleared that up for me. But
I'm sure it won't be the last we hear of it. Because
I agree with the lads in the chat. It's yes, not my favourite, to be honest.
Yeah, it's difficult to know what's what with it sometimes. So I just, whichever site I prefer to use for my data, I just go with whatever they're saying on that site. It's easier. So here's a still clip of the first goal that Arsenal scored today. Ball being whipped in from the left-hand side here from Declan Rice. It's nice to actually see someone else take corners for a change at Arsenal. 2 things here that I picked up from watching the game. Firstly, I think we can all agree that jump from Gabriel is absolutely outrageous. I've managed to pause it at the most perfect time to just show you how much height he's got in this leap. Yes, he's using the defender in a legal way. It was checked by VAR. But the leap here from Gabriel is absolutely outrageous. But what really makes this goal for me, outside of that, and I'm not sure if you picked up on this as well, Keith, you may have done, is Trossard blocks Anderson in the build-up. And Anderson's a big guy. He blocks his run and stops him from being able to either put Gabriel off or maybe just get a little touch on that ball to maybe flick it over Gabriel's head, say, for example. And it just goes to show how important having someone like Nicolas Jova is on the training ground for these set pieces. And at the time of this goal going in, the statistics came up on screen to say that Arsenal continued to be ranked number 1 with, at the time, was 12 goals from set pieces. So it just goes to show how important winning games in this fashion can be, not just scoring goals from open play, but we want those as well. So was there anything else that you picked up from this particular set piece routine?
Pretty much the same as you've picked up, really, Jake. I didn't notice Trossard's block until they showed the replay. And it's like, when I played, obviously not the tallest person in the world. So I was always told, even if you're not going to win the ball, you make a challenge, even if it's enough to put somebody off. And it's kind of that in reverse a little bit. But my initial thought was, I think that's going to be given as a foul. But then when you saw the replay, Gabriel was very clever with his hands.
Very clever.
Mine was on the potential penalty against Jesus, actually. But yeah, the height. It was like, I remember when Cristiano Ronaldo was in his pomp, his leap was phenomenal. And it's every bit as phenomenal as that. And he didn't have a huge run up either.
No.
So, no, those are the main things I picked up on. And, if it wasn't for the set piece success that we have, we'd have been going in at half time 0-0 and the entire complexion of the game would have changed.
Absolutely. So I'm trying to get a still image here up on screen of the second goal. But typically, the internet doesn't want to work. But yeah, looking at the second goal, we came in, we were obviously 1-0 up in sort of 10 minutes, and then we had to wait until the 37th minute then before we were rewarded with a second goal. And what I quite liked between the first and the second goal was just how much Arsenal controlled the game in terms of keeping possession, limiting Crystal Palace to very few chances when they did have them. And then patience prevailed. We got another set piece and we got a second goal. So just before we go into sort of analysing that second goal, not that there's much to analyse, there's a few talking points, of course, but between the first and the second goal, was there anything that you picked up, any kind of small differences like you did in that first 10 minutes?
It felt a little bit, I agree with what Chippy Boy said actually about Havertz. I thought Havertz started well, but then there was a point where he went off the boil, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But with the controlling of the game, obviously we've been much more pragmatic this season. Last season we were moving the ball really, really quickly, but there were more defensive frailties, whereas this season, less so going forwards. But our defensive stats have been much, much better. It felt like today, even though Palace weren't a particularly great side, it was a really good blend of the successes of both seasons. And I felt, weirdly for me, pretty comfortable all through the game. Normally I'm jumping up and down and I'm a nervous wreck.
Me and you both.
But no, today it felt like a really good blend of the both styles, shall we say, from last season and this season.
Yeah, and I do have to agree with you there. This is not the same Arsenal side as last year. And whilst the system and the setup and the types of players might be very similar, it's not exactly the same. And Arteta's even come out himself and said that, he's not necessarily interested in playing, attractive and exciting football to please the fans. He's here to get results. And if I'm being honest with you, in that first half, especially between the first and the second goal, there were periods of the game where I was looking at this and I thought this is boring. This is there wasn't much going on. But at times, sometimes you have to win games like that. You have to just control possession. You have to soak it all up, and eventually you are rewarded. And thankfully, I've now managed to get a still picture of the second goal. I've paused it at a point where the ball is here just above Henderson. Now, the reason I've decided to pause it just here is for the reason that Henderson complained massively to the referee after this goal went in. And it was reviewed by VAR because apparently he thought he was being impeded by Ben White, who you can see sandwiched here between the Palace defender and Henderson in goal. Now, the reason why this wasn't given as a foul, from what I understand, is he hasn't moved at all, Ben White. He stood his ground from the exact position from where the corner was taken from Bukayo Saka. So he's done nothing wrong. So it's down to the goalkeeper then to move around Ben White. So it's a little bit unfortunate. And I do remember last season, I don't know if you remember this, Keith, we had a goal disallowed from a corner because there was an arm or a hand just under the arm of Ben White from a corner, and it did eventually get disallowed. So it does look like, Arsenal are learning. And again, another great set-piece routine, more than likely coached by Nicolas Jover. What were your thoughts on this goal?
Well, firstly, you just stole my line because that's exactly what I was going to say, that just stood there. He's just standing his ground, basically. And the keeper is obviously going to complain about it. But if he wants to get around him, he's got to get him out of the way. But also from this still, even with my poor eyesight, it looks like whoever the defender is, his arm is out. And it looks almost like he's pinning him against the keeper anyway.
That's a good observation.
There was the goal last season where I think White either had his arm on the keeper or he was holding his shirt or something. And obviously he and we have learnt from that because there's no foul there at all. He's just stood there. It was reviewed by VAR.
Unfortunately, according to the Premier League, it does look like the goal has been given down as an own goal, which I found quite odd because
I want to see the angle though, because rule, I'm fairly certain the rule is if it's not on target and it hits one of the defending team, then it's an oggy. But if it's on target, it's classed as a deflection. And I think Dean Henderson was probably more pissed off that the ball's gone in off the back of his head than anything else, to be honest.
Yeah, it's one of those typical ones, isn't it, where the goalkeeper isn't going to want the want to claim it at all. Who would want to claim an own goal? But from my point of view, similarly to yourself, if the ball is on target or going towards goal, then even if it does come off an opposition player, it should be a goal to Gabriel. So I did find that one quite odd. But it is what it is. We'll see what happens soon. This came at the 37th minute, and then it was pretty much just cruise control again for Arsenal all the way up until half-time. And as we saw earlier from the stats, Arsenal in complete control with 64% possession, 8 shots compared to Crystal Palace's, all of which barring one outside the box. So very much a comfortable and controlled first half from Arsenal. And one thing that I saw on social media at half-time, which you mentioned earlier on, funnily enough, was whilst it's all well and good scoring goals from set pieces, and if it means we win games for the rest of the season, I'm obviously going to want to take it. But there were Arsenal fans just screaming out for us to score a goal next from open play. Thankfully, we ended up scoring 3 of them, and we'll go into them in just a moment. But was there anything that you picked up between that second goal and half-time, or?
The only thing I would focus on, because I think everyone played well today, played pretty well.
Yeah.
But as I said, Kai Havertz seemed to go off the boil after he was all right the first 15, 20 minutes. And then there was a point he made a really good run through the channel, didn't quite get the ball. And then literally they went up the other end. He gave the ball away and they went on the attack. And he kind of jogged it in. Now, you could argue that he might have been tired from his run through the channel in like the half space, if you like. But I don't want to see a player jogging it in when we're defending, when they're trying to make ground back up on the other team, especially when that player is the one who's given the ball away. It just felt like he was jogging it in. I don't want to go in on him because he's had loads of stick and I do want him to succeed. But I've got a little bit of a Mesut Ozil vibe from his demeanour as he was running back. And he didn't really seem to get it back. There was another point where we'd beaten the press. It was down in the right-hand corner. And I think Raya made a really good pass to him. And he was on the half turn. And all he had to do was carry on the turn. And we were away and we were on the attack. But he went back in and played the ball back in again. I can't think for a minute that that's something that's been coached into him. Maybe he's still struggling to get used to the specifics of his role. But yeah, when he turned back in, it was a prime opportunity. Whether people aren't talking to him or his awareness isn't that great, but he did have the opportunity to turn out and put us on the break and didn't. And from that point on, I was thinking it's time to move him and get somebody else on for the rest of the game.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the subs in a moment, but it's a really good point, and it makes you wonder if that was one of the reasons why he was hooked off for ESR in comparison to someone else, because Declan Rice came off, who's a key figure in this side, just like Martin Odegaard, and the game was pretty much done at the time of the substitutes happening, so it makes you wonder why Arteta decided to say bring Kai Havertz off and not Odegaard, even though there is this big break between now and our next game. So yeah, it's another good observation, and it does make you wonder, was it a tactical decision? Was it that Arteta wasn't happy with, some of the little things that Kai Havertz was doing? So definitely something to keep an eye on now that ESR is fit, and there's this constant sort of revolving door of who should play in that left 8. So definitely one to keep an eye on. A couple of comments coming in here from the chat before we jump into second half analysis. Play Gabriel up top, not a bad shout at all. Remember the old school days where when you were chasing the game, you'd stick a defender, a centre back up top to try and win a game and just pump the ball on. So maybe there's a return of some old fashioned tactics on the horizon. Keepers always be in tarts. Yeah, they will literally try to claim absolutely anything and everything, won't they? And Rancid Pumpkin coming in here, agreeing with the point that you just made. So we scored our third goal, which we will go into detail in just a moment, on the 59th minute. But between the second half starting and the third goal going in, there were a couple of VAR reviews. Thankfully, they weren't sort of major talking points. The first one was foul on Bukayo Saka. I think Gabriel Jesus had the ball on the right-hand side and played it in. Saka was making a run through the middle. He was fouled by Will Hughes, maybe a slight tug on the shirt, maybe went down a little bit too easily. That was early doors. I think that was like the 49th minute. And then the other one was Nathaniel Klein, who impeded Gabriel Jesus. And in the commentary, they said that he went down quite theatrically. And that might be one of the reasons it wasn't given. It was reviewed by VAR. I'm not too sure if you remember those two points in the game before the third goal went in. I have to agree with VAR. I can't see many fans sort of disagreeing. I'm assuming that you're also on that side of the fence.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there was anything in the Saka one.
No.
The one with Jesus, I thought Nathaniel Klein was very, very clever and employed kind of the dark arts of defending, if you like, because he definitely slowed his run, and you can see in the replay that his run was slowed down. But his hands were on him for just the right amount of time for it to not be blatant, and then he let his hands away. I think defenders are getting quite wise to this rule now. But that one as well, I don't think it was a penalty.
No, yeah, I think it was the right decision. And I suppose what makes it maybe slightly more interesting is if Gabriel Jesus doesn't go down in the manner that he does, I wonder if it would have been viewed differently. We'll never know. But
stood there with his arms up and saying, "Come on!" Instead of throwing himself down, you might get a different outcome. I don't know.
Yeah, thankfully, we didn't have to worry about that in a game like this. There's been plenty of games this season, not just Arsenal, but other clubs as well, where VAR haven't given decisions that have had an impact on the outcome of the game. Thankfully, today wasn't one of those games. And I'm sure it's not the last time we'll speak about VAR either. But moving on to the third goal, which in my opinion is possibly the best goal of the game for a number of different reasons. So you can see on screen here, Crystal Palace have just taken a corner. You can see the ball here. David Raya is in the process of leaping commandingly to get the ball, which is exactly one of the reasons why we signed him. He's great at coming for crosses, whether it be from open play or set pieces. And what I really like about this move, and the reason I've paused it at exactly where it is right now, we can see that Palace are very much kind of gung-ho at this point in terms of looking to try and get a goal at 2-0 and change the momentum of the game. Defensively, they're not set up very well at all for the counter-attack here. The reason I've decided to pause it where it is, if we just have a look at Jesus here on the left-hand side, before Raya even catches his ball, if I just move this on just a little bit, he's already starting to make that move. Like, he's already starting to run. He's anticipating that counter-attack and to create an overload. And we can see here on the edge of the box as well, Trossard is doing exactly the same thing. And if we move this video on a little bit more, we can see where the ball eventually ends up with Gabriel Jesus basically putting Palace in a really awkward position. The last thing you want as a defender is the likes of Gabriel Jesus and Trossard bearing down on goal when you're outnumbered. It was a fantastic pass. It was at this point where, or just after this point, as Gabriel Jesus looks to play the ball, there was a review for VAR offside. For me, miles onside. And then if we have a look here, great footwork here to send the Palace defender the wrong way. And we make it 3-0. Some interesting facts from this. I'm hoping I'm not taking any thunder away from you here, Keith, because I do know you enjoy your facts. This is the first Arsenal goal that Trossard has scored, which hasn't been assisted by Bukayo Saka since we signed him.
That's mad, isn't it? Absolutely mad stat, that.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think this is now his first goal after a 10-game drought without any goals. And he's one of the best natural finishers at the club. So I'm really, really glad to see that he's back on the score sheet, because at the business end of the season, really, really pivotal to have some of your best players in top form. So was there anything in this move that you noticed that I haven't covered?
No, not specifically. I mean, I hadn't noticed actually how quick we sprung to get the ball off Raya. And as you already said, I mean, that's why he's there. And I don't think there's very much to choose between him and Rambo other than collecting crosses. And I think distribution is slightly better from Raya, and he's proved that there.
Yeah.
That's one of the points I was nervous because I don't know if you remember, Trossard had basically spooned one literally 5 minutes before in exactly the same position. And I was worried it might have been playing on his mind, but he was very, very composed. It was a very good finish. And another interesting stat, because I did a little bit of Googling while the game was going on. And up until that point, Gabriel, if they give him the goal, which they won't, he had scored 3 of our last 4 goals. If you include the goal against Liverpool, then Saka scored against Fulham, and then he scored the 2 today. So he'd scored 3 of the last 4. And he still has.
I didn't know that. I didn't realise.
Yeah, it's only because I was interested. I'm sure he scored recently and had a look, and he had. But that goal that Trossard scored there, it could prove to be a very, very important goal because obviously it's got in the players' heads a little bit about the lack of goals. He just missed one in exactly the same position.
He did,
remained calm and finished really, really well. It reminded me a little bit of Jesus' one against Man United, actually, when he sat Dalot down when he slid past him. Big goal. Very, very big goal.
Very, very, very big goal. And we were talking about Jesus just a minute ago with regards to that VAR decision. So a couple of comments coming in with regards to Jesus just very, very quickly. He does throw himself about a little bit too much. I have to agree. And Chippy Boy here also mentioned that Jesus was onside for the only time in the game, it felt like. I have to say he hasn't played for quite a while now because I think he missed the Liverpool game, didn't he, through a sort of minor injury. And then obviously he's been on this 2-week warm weather training. So he hasn't played for quite a while. He's obviously fit, but not quite match sharp yet. He did seem to come alive in that last 15 to 20 minutes. And I don't know if it's because, Palace heads had dropped or, they'd gone off the boil because of the way the game was going. But yeah, there were large parts of the game where he just didn't seem quite at it, his normal self, if you will. Just before we get into goal number 4 and 5, because they are very, very similar. So we're going to kind of analyse them at the same time. And I've also only got clips of the 5th goal, oddly enough. I don't know why. I can't seem to find any on TNT Sports of the 4th goal. Not too sure why they've done that. But in between the goal that we just spoke about and the last 2, there are a number of substitutes made. We already spoke about the likes of Rice coming off and that sort of game management of bringing off key players because we've got some really important games coming up. But a big moment for me, and I know, Keith, you're a huge, huge fan, and we've already kind of touched on him a little bit already, is Emile Smith-Rowe came on, not just for a few minutes at the end of the game, for a good chunk of the game. I think he's got 27 odd minutes at the end. Because of how much of a fan you are, how big is this in terms of squad depth? What can he provide to Arsenal moving forward?
I think it's massive. I was starting to be concerned that maybe Mikel Arteta had lost faith in him, and we're just bringing him on as an afterthought. Last 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes here and there, which is no good to him. Watching his press conference yesterday, when obviously there's been lots of talk about ESR with potential bids coming from other clubs, and he said himself, we need to find a way to get more minutes into him, and he's done that today. And yeah, I was stoked that he came on for a good half hour. I'm claiming all the credit for it because my black and gold ESR shirt I gifted to my daughter Willow yesterday. She wanted a football top, so I gave her that, and she was wearing it while the game was on. So I think I'm going to claim the credit for that, not Mikel Arteta or ESR. But he looked less rusty than I was expecting.
Yeah, he looked right up for it.
Good. His awareness around him, which should be good anyway. But I've always preferred the thought of him as a box to box player, and I thought he settled really, really quickly today.
Yeah, and before the sort of injuries he had in the middle of this season, when he was getting the odd minutes here and there, and today, it does seem as though Arteta prefers him now in that left 8 role. That's where he keeps being brought on, as opposed to a few seasons ago when he was playing regularly. He was always off that left-hand side. So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, whilst he may play in that left 8 moving forwards, it's nice to know that we've got players who can play multiple positions depending on who your opponent is and how you want to break them down and how you want to open them up. So one to keep an eye on now moving forward, especially knowing that we don't have those cup competitions where, you know, your ESRs and your Kiviors and a number of other players would normally get minutes, how he impacts and tries to break into this team now moving forward between now and the end of the season.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I don't know how you feel about it, Jake. It's like it feels to me like we haven't replaced the balance since Xhaka left, and we've tried different players in that role, and it doesn't seem to quite click. I know we've spoken about what a huge loss Timber's injury is. But it feels like we haven't got the same balance there that we had last year, and you know, potentially if he gets back into the starting lineup, it could be round peg, round hole on that one. Who knows?
It could well be, because, you know, for most of the first half of the season, we've seen a number of different players play in that left 8 role. We've seen, you know, Jorginho and Declan Rice play there as 2 double deep single pivots, or Rice as an 8. You know, we've seen Kai Havertz play there. We've seen Trossard play there. So maybe Arteta doesn't even know who the best player is.
You're probably right.
And I do get that maybe playing a Trossard or a Kai Havertz there when you're playing against a Palace at home where you know they're going to play deep with 5 at the back. I get it. You know, same with why you play a Zinchenko in these types of games. And then when you're playing against a better opposition, you know, who is that player you play there? You know, when Thomas Partey's back fit, do you play a Thomas Partey and a Rice? So there's loads of variables.
Yeah,
and I think that's why it's so important that we have squad depth, and we need to make sure that people like ESR can remain fit and hungry and knocking on that door moving forwards. Okay, so moving into the last 2 goals, even though this is the 5th goal, they both happened in a very similar fashion, in the sense that Arsenal winning the ball back in the middle of the park. Saka done it for the first of these 2 goals. Saliba, as you can see on screen, doing it here for the second. If we move this picture on just quickly, this ball here from Jorginho deep, he's clearly tracking that run from Martinelli on the left-hand side, and Martinelli times this run absolutely perfectly, because if we move it on here, that's the ball bouncing over the back 4 into the path of Martinelli before he eventually tucks the ball into the back of the net, which was identical to his first goal just a few minutes beforehand. He takes up quite literally the same position in the same position of the pitch, and it's deja vu. 4-0, 5-0. At this point of the game, not only is it Arsenal obviously being clever, some of the second half substitutions combining against tired legs, dropped heads, morale low, but it's just nice to see Arsenal really finishing the game off strong. What did you make of these last 2 goals?
Firstly, the finish. I think the finishes were absolutely brilliant, because Henderson must have known from Martinelli's body shape where that ball's going, unless he's going to give him the eyes. Especially the first one, because his body was at more of an angle to bend it round him. And I think the finishes were really good. The timing of the passes was brilliant. I'm actually going to claim credit for the 4th one as well, because when Eddie had the ball, it was like I was playing Xbox. And I was like, release it now. And he released it just at that moment. So I think he heard me. So I'm claiming the credit for that goal as well. I want to spare a thought for Nathaniel Klein, because he's spent an hour chasing Trossard around with his quick, nimble feet and his turns and everything. And when he saw that number 11 come up, he must have been like shouting at Roy, saying, look at this, take me off. I don't want to be chasing him as well. But Martinelli proved to be a really good outlet coming on as a sub. Whereas if he'd have started the game, he wouldn't have been this fresh, but he was hanging out wide. True. And he was creating that gap inside or between the fullback and the centre-back by coming wide. He was dragging him out a little bit, and the ball was on every time. But the vision from Jorginho for that pass, it was absolutely exquisite. It was absolutely exquisite. And I think it's the second time this season now where he's played 2 absolutely outrageous passes. So it's nice to see him chipping in with the goals and help him break teams down. We are going to go into some player ratings now. We're not going to go through the whole Arsenal 11. I do appreciate that it's not something that everyone wants to see. So we're going to go through 2, 3, maybe 4 players from the Arsenal side, for good or for bad, because there are always good and bad to talk about. Thankfully today, it's all good. So we don't have to worry about that too much. But just before we do that,
off the back of our conversation around ESR, there are some comments coming in from the chat. Rancid Pumpkin coming in here agreeing with the fact that he has to stay fit and put those good performances in. And it's a few windows now where a number of clubs have been sniffing round to see if he's available. The latest rumour from Fabrizio Romano I saw, there's West Ham inquired, but it was immediately knocked back from Arsenal, which is nice to see. Chippy also saying that it's nice to see the English lads combining, and also Rancid Pumpkin speaking about how good it is to see Martinelli get a goal, prove people wrong in having a poor season. Let's hope he kicks on now and gets into double figures again for goals scored for Arsenal. That would be very, very nice to see. So I think there's a few obvious players here to talk about. So we'll start with those two, the first of which being Gabriel at the back, as the screen refreshes on its own. He's been credited with man of the match. And what's quite funny is man of the match was credited at a time before Martinelli had scored his 2 goals. So I do wonder whether or not that would have influenced the decision on who got man of the match. Do let me know in the chat. Do you think this is the right call? Who was your Arsenal man of the match? No real surprises here with regards to his heat map being the left-sided centre-back. Obviously in quite an advanced position at times because Arsenal had large parts of possession in and around the kind of halfway line, pushing Crystal Palace back. Unfortunately, even according to SofaScore, he's only been credited with just the 1 goal. Coming off on the 81st minute with an apparent knock. Hopefully this is more of a precaution. The last thing we want is back into the season, another defender, key defender being out like we had last season with Saliba. 5 clearances, a block, winning 8 out of 12 duels, which is really, 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 really good. Solid passing stats as well, completing 5 long balls out of 7, which is fantastic. Making those early passes, like you said earlier, Keith, in today's show. What did you make of his performance today?
I thought he played really, really well. Whenever it comes to talking about man of the match, I normally try to veer away from the person who scored the goals, because sometimes when you watch it on telly, they'll just throw it at whoever scored the winning goal or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple of players who I think played particularly well, but I can't really argue with him being given man of the match. I love on that heat map, there's a little dot right up in the left wing corner. That's the one when he had that tussle with Chris Richards. And
that's right.
I don't like Tierney as a ref, as a rule. I just don't like the look of him. But I liked how he let that flow there, because it would have been very easy to blow his whistle too quickly.
You see it all too often now, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, that sums up what a great game Gabriel had. You know, he's up there in the battling as a left winger as well as getting goals and stopping goals. So I thought he played very, very well. Can't see past him for man of the match, to be honest.
Yeah, it's really, really difficult to see past him as man of the match. And those in the chat are absolutely agreeing. What I find quite interesting as well, though, and we will have a look at his stats in just a moment to see whether or not there's more to it than we've maybe realised, is according to SofaScore, at least, in terms of their ratings, Gabriel Jesus has been given a higher rating out of 10, only slightly, than Gabriel at the back. So I do find that quite interesting. So let's just have a quick look. Very, very Jesus type heat map, coming deep, that number 9, no real surprises there. Played the same amount of minutes as Gabriel at the back, got himself an assist, a number of shots throughout the game, completing 4 dribbles out of 4. Passes on the lower side. He does often quite well link up that sort of front 3/front 4. So for me personally, that seems a little low. Only involved in just the 23 passes, which I find quite low for 80 plus minutes. But of those 23 passes, 16 complete. 4 of them were key passes in the game. So what he did do when he had the ball at his feet was obviously of a very, very high quality, creating 2 big chances from that. Always involved in the duels, winning 8 out of 13. And to my surprise, he was only offside 3 times. It felt like it was a lot more than that.
What was that, in the last 10 minutes or what?
I don't know. It must be. Yeah, it must be. When he was on the bench, he was still getting flagged as offside. But yeah, look, he had a good game. I Quite surprised it was as high as 8.5. But when you look at the fact that he created 4 key passes, 2 of which became big chances from just 16 completed passes, you know, obviously a real handful going forward with 4 out of 4 completed duels. What were your thoughts on his performance?
Do you know what? I was toying with actually making him my man of the match. You know what you get with Gabriel Jesus, and I love his work rate and how strong he is when he's holding the ball up. And there was a bit down in the right-hand corner where he robbed the defender, won a free kick, and he had no right to even win the ball, to be honest. I love that about him. He's never going to be a prolific goal scorer, but his work rate and his work ethic is immense. And there was one turn in the second half when he just done a bit of a Cruyff and he flicked inside. Just little things like that I love about his game. But the reason I didn't go for him was because of how he threw himself on the floor for the penalty. If he hadn't done that, I probably would have gone with him, because all through the game, he just never stops. With the exception of some of his passing, some of his distribution, the first 5 minutes, there was a few wayward passes. But everything was 100 miles an hour then. And it does feel like they've been given the guidance to start moving the ball a lot quicker based on what we've seen today. But yeah, other than that, I thought he had a good game.
Yeah, solid game. He definitely seemed to come alive a little more towards the last sort of 10 minutes before being subbed off. Maybe fresh legs and heads dropping in the Palace camp may have been the reason why it happened. But he really did seem to come to life in that last sort of 10 to 15 minutes of his time on the pitch. Chippy Boy even agreeing with Jesus being offside even whilst on the bench. And there is a comment coming in here from Rancid Pumpkin about our thoughts on Odegaard, which we will touch on next. We'll make Martin Odegaard our 4th player to have a conversation about. But I think the other obvious one, when I mentioned there was 2 players that we were going to look to discuss today, was Gabriel Martinelli and the impact that he made coming off the bench. I know Rancid Pumpkin is a big fan of Martinelli as well. And just looking at the 2 goals that he scored, there's no real surprises here at just how much heat there is on this map on that left-hand side, coming in from the left to the right and curling that ball around the goalkeeper, as we've just seen from the goal analysis. Just the 21 minutes, 2 goals, 2 shots in the game itself, 86% passing accuracy, winning 3 out of 4 duels. And got himself involved in 3 tackles. We know that Gabriel Martinelli is an absolute workhorse. These stats here from a defensive point of view are normally a little bit higher when he spent more time on the pitch. That's because he just doesn't know how to stop running, it seems, at times. But you kind of touched on it earlier about how his performance might have been a little bit different had he have started the game. I suppose the question I want to ask you here, Keith, is obviously what we have on the left-hand side is 2 very good players in Trossard and Martinelli. And maybe because he's been out of form of late and he's not been in this kind of free-flow scoring form like we saw him in last season, do you think that this was kind of like a Trossard, here's your opportunity, is given Martinelli a bit of a kick up the backside, and he said, Arteta, this is why you should be starting me every week. You do not bench me. What were your thoughts on the whole selection of the left-hand side and the way he's reacted?
I think you've touched on a really good point there. When I first saw the lineup, I wasn't that disappointed. I like Trossard, but Trossard never seems to shine as much when he starts a game. He always seems to be a better, as Arteta would call, a better finisher. Obviously, like we touched on earlier, there's more pace, more space on the pitch. The players you're playing against are more tired. And it could be that this was a bit of a masterclass from Arteta. Yeah. Martinelli probably did need a bit of a kick up the backside, but he looked like a boy who was really struggling for confidence as well. And some of the stuff I've seen on social media, like people picking on his missus for liking junk food, and maybe that's why he's not playing so well. But it's almost like one of those where if you're struggling, you get dropped to the reserves, and because you're playing against players who aren't quite as good, you get that confidence boost. And it felt like bringing him on for the last 20 minutes, he had that space to run into. I think his first run, he went round Nathaniel Klein and he had an extra touch, which gave him the space. But then it's kind of like he couldn't sort his feet out.
Yeah.
But the strength of character of the boy, because he could have shrunk a little bit then. But then, like I said, because he's got so much space to run into and tired legs running against him, maybe that's what he needed, just a confidence boost. He's got himself 2 very, very good goals now. And, he's not going to want to be on the bench, even though he's a great impact player. He's too good to be a finisher. He needs to be starting. So, maybe all things considered, his confidence levels will go up. Because I think that's the only thing he was lacking in, was just his confidence, his end product. Like you said, he's just a running machine. He will run all day long. And he is so fast.
Yeah, and there's a good point coming in from the chat, actually, that we do have to consider, because, injuries are a big part of players' games. And yes, normally it's really big injuries. Sometimes it's the consistency of injuries as well that can have an effect. And, maybe he has lost a yard of pace after this accumulation of injuries over the last few seasons, and maybe some consistency now. He hasn't been injured for a while, thankfully. And maybe this consistency now in playing regularly without injury, he can kick on, he can gain that yard of pace back, and that confidence, especially after a performance like today. It's going to be really hard to overlook him in selection for the next game. Although Trossard did get a goal, it's a really good headache for Arteta to have. It's exactly what you want. Sometimes you don't want selection to be easy, because complacency creeps in, and that's a big argument at the moment on the right hand side with Bukayo Saka. I don't think anyone's doubting his level of ability and his contribution this season as Arsenal's top goal scorer, but sometimes not having that someone behind you to give you that kick up the backside is what people need. But we won't get into that now, because that's a conversation for another day. But as Rancid Pumpkin asked in the chat to take a look at Martin Odegaard, we can see here on screen now that Kai Havertz was given a 6.7 rating, and Martin Odegaard not too far behind. I wouldn't say this was a game that he necessarily went missing in, but there were other players who came to the forefront to take responsibility for today, which I know sometimes people can be a little harsh in judging players like Odegaard, because he is captain as well, and because of the sorts of performances he put in last season with his goals and assists. And I think that expectation level now is quite high on someone like Martin Odegaard. And yeah, we have to be honest, probably didn't have the best game today. Sometimes consistency for him can be called into question. Although in saying all of this, he did still have an 88% completion rate from midfield. A lot of traffic in terms of the ball did go through him. He was involved in 3 key passes throughout the game. His duels are certainly on the low side. He normally sets the tone for that press when Arsenal move forward. You're constantly seeing him wave players forward when Arsenal press, especially at home. And he was dribbled past 4 times today. I think they were all Eze, it felt like, who seemed to have somewhat of a decent game when the score was slightly lower. But what were your thoughts on his performance today, Keith?
I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. It was kind of enough, I suppose. I mean, we all remember just how bright he shone last season, and there's been lots of talk about where Saka and Martinelli have been doubled and tripled up on, and I think that to a certain extent has had a detrimental effect on Odegaard's performance, because when Saka's getting squeezed more, so is Odegaard, due to they're so close together to each other in the game, and everyone's expected him to be coming inside because of his left foot's an absolute wand. I'd quite like to see him have more of a free role, so he's not just on the right all the time. Let him wander, because no one's ever going to be expecting him to come in from the left. It's not very often you see him over that side of the pitch. I think he's just a bit of a victim of his own success, and he needs to find a way to create those spaces for himself again. Having said that, sometimes I look at him, I think, how have you kept that ball? I know you give it away 15 times today, but in such tight spaces. And I like the throw-in that we've been doing, where Ben White's taking the throw-in and Odegaard kind of comes over to the byline.
Yes. And
we very nearly had a lot of success with that against Liverpool. And I saw we tried it once more today, but the throw was terrible. He just needs to find a way, whether it means roaming around a little bit more if he's allowed to find the space within the structure of what Arteta wants him to do. But I like players to be able to go each side. I know, we have wingers who play predominantly on their stronger foot is the inside foot, and it does sometimes squeeze things. I just like to see players being able to go outside as well. And
yeah,
because his left foot is so good, you don't see him use his right that often, to be honest.
No, he is one of those players where he's fortunate enough to be so good on his left foot that he doesn't have to rely on the right foot as other players do. But I do think that is probably going to about wrap things up for today's show. I will check the comments from the chat box just before we do shoot off for the afternoon. Rancid Pumpkin again coming in and talking about the differences between using Trossard at the start and throwing Martinelli in at the end of the game, and tired legs were definitely a part of that today, or at least you'd like to think so. And he goes on to say that Odegaard did well. He shines more when we have to play against a low block. It just wasn't an Odegaard game, if you like. Yeah, it's going to be that, isn't it? And I think because of, like I said, how high he set the bar, and because he is the Arsenal captain, when he does go missing at times, I think the criticism can be twice as much on his shoulders, because it's a heavy cannon to carry, as they say.
It certainly is, and he's still a very young man, even though he's been Norway captain for I don't know, last 57 years or whatever it is. But he's a young man. He's nowhere near his peak, and to compare him with KDB is ridiculous, because that guy is in his peak. Whereas Odegaard was 24, I think he's 24.
I think he's 24, yeah.
Yes, he's still a young man. He's still at least 4 years away from hitting his peak. But he's just having a rough patch at the moment. But even having said that, he's still playing well. It's just a rough patch compared with what he achieved last season.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And we do know that he will come good again at some point this season. And hopefully it will happen when we need it most, because we know that there'll be other players that fall out of form. And then it's when other players step up to the plate. We need to make sure that we've got that going on, that revolving door of form, if you will, throughout the season. But as I said, that is going to about wrap things up for this Arsenal Analysed live show. Keith, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Hopefully you can join me next time when we play again. It's going to feel like ages again now since we play.
Oh, no.
So, but yeah, no, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope everyone in the chat and for those who are watching have really, really enjoyed. If you're new around here, do please consider subscribing. Hit that like button as well if you have enjoyed today's show. But for now, I'm JC. This is Keith. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will catch you in the next Arsenal game. Take care, stay safe, and come on, you Gunners.